The information provided by Taming Lightning is designed to provide helpful information and to educate on the subjects discussed. The information provided is true and complete to the best of our knowledge and is not intended to be used without professional guidance and supervision. All recommendations are made without guarantee on part of Taming Lightning and affiliates. Taming Lightning and affiliates disclaim any liability in connection with the use of this information. Taming Lightning podcast is supported by the Pittsburgh Glass Center, a non-profit public access glass studio and one of the top glass facilities of its kind in the U.S., with a knowledgeable and friendly staff and a safe, fun atmosphere. Our community is made up of artists, collectors, students, or just those fascinated by glass. Depending on your interests and schedule, there's a class for you, be it a 2-hour introductory workshop, 8-week classes, or 5-day summer intensives taught by artists from all over the world. As some of you may know, be it the website, newsletter, or social media, the plasma workshop Blow and Glow, taught by Jaime Guerrero and Ed Kirshner at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, is sold out. Thanks to everyone who registered and making sure this class runs. I'm excited to meet new and old faces as we explore a variety of techniques for plasma in the hot shop. Keep an eye out for more classes at the Pittsburgh Glass Center as we work to provide a space for learning neon and plasma. You can check us out on the web at www.pittsburghglasscenter.org or call our studio at 412-365-2145. Taming Lightning is affiliated with the Plasma Art Alliance, which formed in 2017 during the exhibition The Art of Plasma at MONA, the Museum of Neon Art. Their mission is to promote illuminated plasma in glass as a sculptural art medium, foster public awareness of the art through exhibitions, conferences, and educational outreach, and support the exchange of information related to the techniques and technologies essential to the advancement of the field. PAA will serve the growing interest in this evolving art for the mutual benefit of artists, enthusiasts, and patrons. You can find them on the web at www.plasmaartalliance.org. I like to mention a support option for Taming Lightning, Buy Me a Coffee. With this, your support goes directly to the podcast by means of assisting with audio equipment, billing or hosting, software and services used in processing the audio, and future travel and professional content. You are by no means obligated to donate, but any support, including commenting and sharing, is appreciated. Welcome back, or welcome to the Taming Lightning podcast. I'm Percy Eccles II. I'm the creator and host of Taming Lightning, as well as the emerging plasma tech at Pittsburgh Glass Center, where I'm researching and developing a space for exploring plasma and neon light. Taming Lightning podcast is a series of conversations to help expand our understanding of plasma and neon light, looking beyond its associations with novelty in sign making, and to explore the potential of noble gases as an artistic medium, with each guest sharing their unique knowledge and experience. The intro is Boost by Joachim Krud. Joachim is a Swedish artist who loves to create chill and happy music, and does so for copyright-free use. Be sure to support his music by giving credit when used, subscribing, and/or by donation via Patreon. You can find him on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Hello, Lightning Tamers. This is episode number 12. In today's podcast, we have Austin, Texan artist Ben Livingston, who is internationally known for his neon light sculpture. He is the inventor of an opalescent color palette for neon, using a variety of UV-sensitive phosphorescent compounds and minerals. Ben originally discovered these glowing compounds in New Zealand in 1985, which ultimately led to his signature work, luminous tubes he calls nightsticks or spirit antennae. He's a multi-medium artist of a variety of materials and skill sets, a musician, songwriter, and avid storyteller, as you discover here shortly. We get a great story about his neon journey, thriving in the face of recent health problems, and reveal what goes into his opalescent color palette, which I hope will gift you with an appreciation for his journey and inspire you to explore and play in your work and life.
Oh man, we're going to have some fun today. Hi, my name is Ben Livingston. I live in Austin, Texas. I don't know if I consider myself an artist. I would say it's more of a general practitioner at this point in my life, as I reflect back on the 35 years I've been doing this neon adventure that's taken me all over the world and introduced me to some of the most wonderful people I could have never met without this journey happening. And so I just turned 60. I'm really excited about that. I'm in great shape, despite the fears of potential shop hazards I've had in the past. You know, if you do neon, there's mercury, there's asbestos, there's high voltage, and for me, there's phosphorescent minerals and also different chemical compounds that I've always been scared to death of. I got an MSDS report that I think made me feel a little better about it, but the fact that I've lived long enough to be amazed that I got to points to a good direction about everything. So anyway, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'd like to answer any questions you have for me here. I'm so excited to be on this program, Percy, and I want to thank you for doing these podcasts. I was listening to a few of them last night, and they're really interesting, and you give a great interview. You're very personable, and so I'm thrilled to be here today. What can I do you for, sir?
Well, I'm glad you're able to, meet up with me, and we did schedule this maybe like a month or two in advance, which is excellent. Most artists I've invited can't even think that far. Most life is chaos, right? So I'm really glad I could have you on the show today.
Oh, terrific! Thank you. The only reason I called you back then and put it off is because of the chaos. Actually,
right?
I learned to kind of postpone things as much as possible. Combined with being probably the laziest person you'll ever meet, I gave myself that kind of time, hoping that I could get this website together and treat you all, this listening public of yours, to it today, if you were to refer to it online. But
certainly.
That not being the case, I went online to my crappy old website last night and put some things on Ben at BenLivingston.com. I'm sorry, BenLivingston.com that would refer to some of the questions that you said you had for me today. So
all right.
Enjoy yourselves.
So my first question comes up is like, how did you get into neon?
Back in, when I was a kid, just a little background. When I was a kid, I always enjoyed just making things, building stuff. I remember when I could pick up a hammer, I enjoyed pushing wood around with nails and just making things that sort of anything that would get me in that trance of there's some kind of quietness in there that you feel when you're creating something. I always enjoyed that. It seemed like tangible materials were that for me. I always loved to draw, though, as well. And so my grandmother, who's in theater, she was an assistant director at this little theater in San Antonio. I think one of her ways to sort of address that was to throw me in the set department to get rid of me while she was trying to do rehearsals. And in that set department, there were a lot of older people in there who took me under their wing and showed me basically how to build cool-looking stuff that didn't have to last. And that was pretty gratifying. And so later on, my mother, Polly Livingston, who became quite a famous voice actress, she at the time became kind of famous for these parties that she would design. And I, with this set building background, I would build these sets for her. And again, I could build these like amazing party sets that didn't have to last. So I would build like 25-foot Chippendale chairs and tables that would be the getting small part of an Alice in Wonderland set. And she would hire the San Antonio Ballet to ice skate on fake ice. And these parties were incredibly elaborate and a whole lot of fun. And, I was getting ready to go off to, I went off, My father introduced me to a guy named George Plimpton because I was such a crappy student in school. I had just real learning disabilities. In fact, I saw my wife and I, she's a dyslexia teacher, and we watched this really funny movie with Kevin Hart the other night called Night School. And I really related to him when he said, "Oh, man, I got the learning herpes," which is definitely kind of relates to my problem. So because I didn't learn things very well through reading, my father turned me on to this guy, George Plimpton. He was a participatory journalist, and that means that he would just live experiences, and then he would write them down. I urge you to Google George Plimpton if you've never heard of him. He's an incredibly fascinating individual. One of his most famous endeavors was being he got on with the Detroit Lions and played one scrimmage over it, but he wrote an entire book over this. He would fail miserably at what he set out to do, but his successes was in the way he would write stories about his adventures of doing things. This guy became an incredible role model for me and basically gave me permission to do whatever basically I wanted that didn't hurt other people and hopefully wouldn't hurt myself. So I sort of launched into these adventures of whatever. Well, my first adventure was that I took a job in the Gulf of Mexico, an offshore gas platform. This was out in the oil field. And that was just the craziest thing. But I saved enough money to do something I really wanted to do, which was to start a used bicycle shop where my cousins were going to school in Santa Barbara, California. And my mother was so nervous about this at the time that she was being offered a party as an artist in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Project for the Arts. She offered me a position as a collaborator to build sets for this party in D.C. Well, that really took my mind off of this crazy bicycle shop. I was loading up a trailer full of broken bicycles to drive out to California. I mean, I was like 20 years old, so, my mind wasn't quite developed yet. And so I took this gig with her and ended up in Washington, D.C., and we built these incredible sets. And this was the first time that I had been exposed to neon. And this was a big Dutch Masters sign from the 50s. And this Dutch Masters sign looked like three cowboys in silhouette. And because all of the three Dutch Masters in this painting looked like cowboys in silhouette. And the idea of this party that we were throwing was this huge gala, like a fundraising gala for the Washington Project for the Arts. And my job was to turn this place into a Texas saloon and dance hall. And it was like an amazing endeavor. It was really, it was overwhelming, but we pulled it off. There was like no budget. And the story's pretty funny, but we got it to happen. And all these amazing artists came from Texas, including Terry Allen and his incredible band. I'd urge you to Google Terry Allen. He's an incredible artist and songwriter. He came up and they played. And anyway, the neon really, I don't know about you people out there, but I had never really noticed neon until I noticed it. And when I saw the neon there, I realized that since I had been drawing all my life, and I was kind of the runt in high school, the only power I had was in my aesthetic. All my friends were these like football players and big surfers, and they had these gorgeous girlfriends. And the only way I could get attention from girls was to draw. And when I saw this neon for the first time, most people have much more profound ambitions about what propels them in the arts. But when I saw that neon, I thought, oh my God, I wonder if I could draw my drawings with light. Like this is an electric Crayola. I could and the first thing that occurred to me was, oh my God, the traction I could get with girls would just be incredible. So my insecurities led the way. And I went on from there. I went back to Victoria, my hometown, Victoria, Texas. I went to the library there, and there was one book on neon there, and it was a book called Let There Be Neon by the great Rudy Stern. I I looked through the book and I saw how ambitious this was, and I saw how involved it would be to create Neon. I mean, the equipment alone. I was 20 years old. There was no way I could have. I didn't know how, and I certainly couldn't afford it, and I just didn't know how you would go about any of that. So it was always in the back of my mind. I went back to work offshore because, again, that's the only way that a South Texas kid can make money that doesn't have an education. You go in the oil field, and the money's pretty good. Well, after I went to Washington, D.C., it really opened my eyes to a bigger world, and I realized that this time that I went offshore, I was going to save money so I could get myself some sort of a cultural education, and my eyes were set on going to Europe. And I thought, it's pretty compact there as far as aesthetic and cultural meaning in their stories and their just the way they've gone about art. And when you've been involved in something for 40 years, it's a long, circuitous route. I'm sure you've heard it all before, but anyway, this is the backstory and I found in the past that some people are kind of interested in that. Sort of gives them an idea about their own trajectory and their own road that they're traveling. And sometimes people who like may feel kind of lost in this world, like I did. Sometimes hearing a story of sort of getting lost in recovery is kind of encouraging. And so I offer that up because I can tell you I was one remarkably lost individual. But I kept paddling out as the surfer I was. And I don't know what compelled me. I guess just the next breath of air. You're alive for another breath of air, so you may as well keep on keeping on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not blanking out. I'm just trying to find myself. So I had been working offshore, and I saved money to go to Europe this time. Only I got a phone call from the Washington Project for the Arts about several months into this, and they asked me to come up and work there. I guess they were impressed with what I had done, and they asked me to come. They had moved, and they were building an alternative space and a bookstore, and they asked me if I wanted to come do this with them. They offered me a job, and I couldn't believe it. And oh God, I was so ready to do something, anything, but work offshore. It was just miserable and quite dangerous. In fact, when you're working offshore, I have to tell you, there's a lot of people lose limbs and some people fall off platforms and they drown. But I tell you, when you're working offshore 120 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico with a group of people, the most dangerous moment of the day is at 11:58. If you're on the staircase to the galley and Ryan's Hope or General Hospital is about to air on television, that is the most dangerous place to be in the Gulf of Mexico because you will get stampeded by all of these roughnecks and workers that are headed to their favorite soap opera and lunch. Anyway, so I was dying to get out of there. And when I got this offer from Al Nodell, the director, I shot out of Texas like a bullet out of a gun. I went straight to D.C. And I was 23 at the time. And I have to say, as a South Texas kid, I was incredibly socially and culturally unaware individual. I just really didn't have a clue about the world around me. And when I went to Washington, D.C., I really I was exposed to all of this, especially in the Washington Project for the Arts, which was really was so open-minded. And I really, I was working with, first of all, Stephen Antonakis, who, if you don't know that, you really have to Google him. He was he is the most famous public art neon artist ever. And his work's all over the world. And his piece called Neon Fronts was on the new building of the Washington Project for the Arts when I got there on the new building. And it was like, I'd never seen anything like it. It was just astonishing to see all of this random neon on the front of this building in the most beautifully composed composition, as you'll see his work. And back in 1980, when was it? 1982. The work may look dated now, but in 1982, nobody had ever seen anything like this. it was high art, and he was commended for that. Anyway, the WPA used a lot of neon in sets for alternative programs and installations. Neon was really their thing, and this was the exposure I was getting to it without even really realizing how important it was going to be to me. So we built this alternative space and this bookstore, and all these artists would come through, like Chris Burden and all of these really hot shots from that time. He was a performance artist. He was famous for sitting in a room and inviting people to shoot him with a gun and different things, just these really outrageous performances he would do. But he came as he was invited to come to the WPA, and he did a performance there where he suspended all the furniture and everything from the ceiling. It was a bitch of an installation, and that's what I was doing after we built it. I was installing work. He would float all of the furniture, everything in the alternative space, and float candles and put candles on it. And it was really beautiful to see this all moving through space in the dark. And so I was exposed to things that I just could never have been exposed to without this experience. So I fell in love with this woman there, and she signed on to go to Europe with me, which was really what I was headed to do. And when the WPA gig was over, that's what we did. And Europe was this amazing place, and because their aesthetic is they're just so steeped in their own aesthetic, and they have, I believe it's probably written in their constitutions that they have aesthetics. It is very different than the United States, which sort of is all about business and ambition. For them, beauty is a very important aspect of life, and their life and their joie de vivre is really a result of that. Just their entire sensibility, and I was very attracted to that. So that said, I came home with a whole new perspective. We spent about 5 months driving around. I bought a crappy old Datsun car in Luxembourg for $400, and I took a set of tools because I just didn't want to get on a train with a bunch of kids going the same place. So Jody, my girlfriend, and I went everywhere and anywhere, from Luxembourg all the way down through France, through Italy, across to Yugoslavia, down into Greece, and then back up to Italy, and then Switzerland, back into France. And we just had this marvelous time, really on an absolute shoestring. We just learned so much and experienced so much. So I became homesick. She was from New York City, and her family really wanted us to get married, and I really considered staying in New York, which is what they wanted me to do. But Texans get homesick for Texas about 9 times out of 10. I really wanted to go home, and I wanted to go back and go surfing and drink with my buddies down in South Texas. And I just begged her to come with me, and the compromise was Austin, Texas. She was waiting to get into law school, and she thought, well, I'll come down there, but I'll only go to Austin. I am not going to Victoria, Texas. There's just no way. So we compromised with Austin, and I came here and got back involved with my mom's parties a little bit. And we were driving down in a road in San Antonio, and we drove by a place called Texas Neon. And I asked her to let me out of the car, and I went inside, and I went to the back of the shop, and I asked where the neon shop was, and I asked for the guy who's making neon, and they sent me to Fritz Ozuna, their glass bender. And Fritz was there, and he saw me, and like he's seen probably 100 other people come through who were going to ask him the same question, and that was, hey man, I wonder how I could learn this, right? Well, he looks at me, he's so jaded, and he's just like, I tell you what, before you ask me any other questions like everybody else, you go to Dean Blazek's school up in Antigo, Wisconsin, and you take that workshop and you come back here and talk to me, and I'll answer any question you want. Well, he had told everybody that. The only difference was I went, and I went up there as the hardest damn thing I've ever done. And thanks to my grandmother, who had left me $5,000 in her will, I had the tuition to do this. And so I went and I spent this 6 weeks, and it was just a crazy time. I rode a bicycle out to the school every day. We'd work all day, and Dean Blazek was a real character. His son Jay, I believe, was still there. Dean had about 5 or 6 students, and I remember he wouldn't let us use blow hoses. It was strictly forbidden, and he was teaching us this real old school method where you don't use a blow hose. You just, you bend within 5% of your pattern, and you put that tube up to your mouth, and you blow looking cross-eyed down that tube to the most approximate way. And it's like learning long division when you have a calculator in front of you. And sometimes the blow hose will fall out of my mouth, and I'm glad he taught me that, because sometimes you're desperate, when something happens and the bend is made and you're there and you're at the tail end of about 14 other ones, and you don't want to lose it, and you're equipped to salvage something because this old coot taught you to do it the hard way. So Dean used to call himself Count de Monet, which was pretty funny. He would thank us all for putting a new roof on his house and all the tuition that we gave him. And basically, he just cut us loose. He would give us patterns, and he taught us 3 different letter styles. He teaches a single block and a double block and a script pattern, a double stroke script, which was, God damn, that was hard. I mean, I'm telling you, from nothing to pulling off a double stroke script by the end of 6 weeks was that's quite a schooling, I got to tell you. I mean, it was not that it was done well, but it was accomplished, and that was really something. Now that I'm remembering that, so I left and I went back to San Antonio, and I walked into Fritz's neon shop at Texas Neon, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, Fritz, I went to Dean Blazek school, and I'm back." And well, his jaw dropped, and he said, "Are you kidding?" And no, I took your advice. I'm here to learn this stuff, and that's why I went. And it was hard. And he said, and anyway, he brought his wife out. They couldn't believe it, and we ended up being fast BFFs. And I'm telling you, if you ever have done an apprenticeship, there's a whole vibe to apprenticeships that is age old. And there's a loyalty that happens between, it's almost parental and childlike. And there's a loyalty and there's a friendship that's so deep. And that's what Fritz and his wife Joan and I established, was that loyal friendship of the teacher to the student. And he hired me for $5 an hour, and it was 12 hours a day. And I'm telling you, being with him in that shop was one of the hardest things I've ever done, doing repairs to all these old signs around town. But it was so gratifying. It's so much fun. It was 12 hours a day, $5 an hour, and the best job, I swear to God, I've ever had.
So that's the origin right there.
That's the origin. Okay, fair enough, and I agree. And so that was a long, laborious story, but the whole time that this was going on, I had ideas of my own. So back in Austin, while I would commute to San Antonio for this job, I was building my own little shop in a garage apartment, in the garage part of a garage apartment I was living in. And I had been, when I moved to Austin, I didn't mention, I got a job with a place called the Austin Chronicle, and that's our entertainment rag here in Austin. It's also the place that started South by Southwest, the biggest music festival in the world. And when I was there, I was offered a job of starting a classifieds in the back of the paper. I did that, and then I went off to another magazine, and I started a classifieds kind of thing in them. And I just felt terrible about print advertising. I just couldn't see any proof in it. So when I quit to go to this neon school, and then I went to Fritz's, I realized that the most effective advertising beyond something that moves is something that's lit and, moths to fire, basically. So what I did was I was entertaining the idea while I was working for Fritz of converting all of my print ad customers into neon sign customers. This was a real easy segue. And everybody, the friends that I'd made of my customers and clients, ad clients, they were very receptive. So I had this sort of instant business all I had to do was just be able to do it, and that was the hard part. I was never a good glass bender. Like I just precision. Maybe it's a learning thing, but I think I have precision herpes too. But I think precision has never been my thing. So basically, after learning my chops as a sign maker, because I had to, it's a great way to learn, because you learn this repertoire of moves, of bends, double backs and 90s and rollovers and all these different things that you learn. You just get them in your bones. Well, when you go to make artwork, your work has integrity. You're not just making this schlock. So though I can't really follow a pattern very well, I mean, I did okay. I did enough for my customers, but I was never satisfied with it. But though you can follow a pattern okay, my bends were always strong, and that's what really mattered. It had integrity. So when I went off to do my artwork, which just evolved over time, it was always strong. It was always it had the integrity to hold up, and so that was gratifying. And I learned that from Fritz and from Dean Blazek, and I will forever be grateful to them as my masters. So I was building this shop in my garage, and that's what I did. I slowly just started taking on customers who were willing, and I started making signs for them. It was not what I was born to do, but it was a great way to make a living. And gosh, that was pretty cool. It was like I made this investment of $5,000, which would not have gotten me very far in college. And here I am on the other side, making friends and making money and really enjoying learning about all the aspects of what this craft and this vocation is all about. Suddenly I'm a craftsperson who's making a living. That's pretty phenomenal. So one thing leads to another, right? And you know, I was just moving along and really enjoying my life in Austin. And one day I remember it snowed really hard in Austin, which is very rare. And a friend of mine went out, and we were just having a great time playing in the snow. And I think we actually even took some mushrooms that day, and we're really having a great time running around. And we even went to the Butler School of Music at UT because we were busy doing donuts in the parking lot in the snow. And my friend was an excellent pianist, and we went into the Butler School of Music, and they have a whole row of rooms that have Steinway pianos, and we were just high as kites. And we would go from one room to the other, and he'd play these amazing, these beautiful movements on piano. And anyway, we just had so much fun in the snow, and that's something that's probably not new to you, is it, up there, Percy? But we got home, and we had answering machines back then. They had a cassette tape in them, and I got a call from a neon shop in New Zealand because of a guy that I met at Dean Blazek's shop, who was there with Dean's son, Mike Blazek. Duncan Reed was from New Zealand, and he had gone home, and he was working in this neon shop called Neo Neon in Auckland. Neo Neon was going to lose him because he was young like me, and he had ambitions, and most young people in New Zealand get the hell out of there like I did out of Victoria. They want to go to Sydney, Australia. They got big ideas and big high hopes and about the big city, and Duncan was raring to go. He definitely had bigger plans than New Zealand, and his ticket out was going to be to get me in to his place. Well, God, let's freak out and go study and figure out how to do it. That's thank you, George Plimpton. So I said yes. I was no more equipped to do this job than oh God, I had 6 months experience after it was just crazy. This was 1980. I think this might have been January of 85. And by March, I was in New Zealand and not knowing what the hell to do with this incredible workload that they put down on me, thinking that I could accomplish it. I was their golden goose, but really I was a broken sparrow. I had no idea. I wasn't good at it. The workload was overwhelming. and they didn't have crossfires. They do everything over there, and probably in Europe as well. With they just use a ribbon burner and hand fires. That's what they do everything with. And Percy, do you do neon? Are you a glass bender?
I am not.
Are you just into the plasma stuff?
I started in the plasma with Pat Collentine. That's how I even got interested in neon. Before it was kind of like neon was there, and it didn't even catch my attention. So I tried bending a few tubes, but I haven't done any fills with tubes just yet.
Well, do you know how difficult it is to do a double back or a 90-degree turn? Working
yeah, I am.
Well, can you imagine not having a crossfire and doing everything on the ribbon burner? I mean, well, maybe you did. I mean, when I was introduced to that, I was so glad that I had heard about that, and I packed a set of crossfires with me, and I took them with me, and I set them at the shop, and everybody came around and just looked at them and was like, what the hell is that? And it didn't help because I really disappointed all of Neon's fantasies about having a workload accomplished in their shop, and I just failed miserably. It was really an embarrassment. I had culture shock, and I just didn't know what to do. There's just no way you can fast forward experience.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make a plant grow by pulling its leaves. I really learned that in New Zealand.
I like that one.
So I came home. I came home for actually my mother had a relapse of cancer, and I would have come home anyway, but it was a great excuse to get the hell out of there. And I had a year-long work visa, and I would have wanted to go to Australia, but I wasn't making enough money at Neon, and I ended up going down to. I learned a lot. There was a Polynesian glass bender that would come in and kind of take over the workload, and he taught me so much about how to actually do all of this work on a ribbon burner. In fact, I don't use a crossfire that much anymore except for welding. But and then I went down to Christchurch, and I learned from I did learn quite a bit in New Zealand from these other techniques. But what I really learned in New Zealand that I want to tell you the story about is they had some really interesting glass that we didn't have here. We had Voltark and EGL and FMS, and I had seen Corning and GE glass from the 40s, like classic colored glass. But I had never seen Mason Light, and I'd never seen German glass, and I'd never seen Italian glass. They had all this stuff because New Zealand just had to import things. Mason Light was English, so that was a direct, Commonwealth thing. They probably had import tax subsidies or whatever. But anyway, they had all this glass that I had never seen. And when you would look at this glass stash with their UV light, it just looked like this incredible candy store. There were these magentas and these oranges and that I'd never seen before. They were just magnificent. And America had not come up with colors this beautiful. We were into satisfying sign customers and really, it's that European aesthetic thing again. We just didn't seem to be into just beautiful things. We were into making neon signs that got customers. We weren't excited about beautiful stuff yet. And so anyway, there was this one bromo blue purple, and it's a Technolux color now, but it was sold through Mason Light, and it was German, and it was bromo blue glass, and it had red phosphor inside of it. Well, there was something that had never happened in the USA that I had never seen before. It was this red phosphor, and the red phosphor that illuminated because of blue UV light was nothing. It was like nothing I had ever seen. And my experience was limited, but this was a huge aha moment for me. So this really stuck with me. And the other thing that I found in New Zealand was there was a guy making these chaser flasher boxes for neon, and the difference for chasing and flashing was that his had I think there were diodes or some way that you could set up these these electronics inside of this box. I brought one home with me. It was quite expensive, but I had never seen anything like this. And the electronics made it in such a way that you could create a story like a cartoon with instead of back and forth, on, off, like, a hammer, up, down, in an animated sign. This animation had what cartoon animation calls a sense of rate, R-A-T-E. And rate is when there's an actual physical movement of like an arm swinging in like a ballerina, like you would, like a cartoon does, rather than just on, off. This was fascinating to me, and I thought, oh man. So basically, I'm just cataloging all of these really interesting materials, and for the unknown, I just was interested. So that's the great thing about curiosity, is it comes up in places later that you'll never know when you're just cataloging things. When you to be just interested and have inquiry into things is such a wonderful aspect of the human mind, because it just is you're creating a catalog. And really, when you think about the human being, we're really just a pile of food and memories. And so if you can keep the food going and the memories coming, later on, you'll be able to access something or some idea that comes around, and you'll have these resources that connect the dots for you. And that's just a great bit of really simple advice. One is just hang around, learn everything you can, and the other is just hang around as long as you can to implement the things you learn. So I got home and I built shop number 3, back in Austin. And when I did, actually that was my second shop. I consider the second shop sort of rebuilding the shop in Auckland. I brought in a lot of things like a diffusion pump and different ways of just implementing things that we did have in the United States that they did not have, that made things easier for the shop in Auckland. So after going down to Christchurch and learning from another really interesting neon guy who was from Germany, and the way that he was a great glass bender, but I thought the most interesting thing about him, Gustav, was that he learned English as a longshoreman through reading Elmer Fudd comic books. So he had this really weird Elmer Fudd the pig cartoon accent with his German accent when he spoke English. It was hilarious. Okay, so I went to New Zealand. I failed miserably because of lack of experience in New Zealand. I had an overwhelmed workload. I discovered this German bromo purple glass with UV there. That was huge. And also this animator circuitry. I went back to Austin. I built shop number 2. I went and found Stephen Antonakis in Dallas. I captured him in a hotel lobby, and asked him if I could drive him around for the next 2 weeks, that I would be his driver if he would mind. And so I did that, and he became my mentor. For the next 8 years, I created movie sets. I did sets for Austin City Limits, which is a syndicated TV program on PBS. I did tons of signs. I was interested in communist propaganda neon because it wasn't commercial, and I created a sign called Neon Mural Number 1. That's, if you Google that, it's this was a neon mural that was 14 by 40 feet. It was non-commercial. It was anti-war statement. This was because of my research and interest in this propaganda, in non-commercial propaganda. So it was an anti-war statement. And it used, my friend Frank Roberts, who was a self-taught radio engineer, came, like this one from New Zealand I was telling you about, that had a sense of rate. And it told a 54-second story of a child's view of the end of the world. This Neon Mural Number 1 not only became a landmark in Austin, but it also beat the Statue of Liberty in an International Lighting Design Award from the Illuminating Engineers Society. It was huge, and millions of people have seen this thing. It played for 22 years on the front of my building in downtown Austin. While that was going on, Rudy Stern, I went to New York, and I wanted to find a gallery. I wanted some traction in New York. I thought it was time. I was doing a lot of paintings, and I was working on this neon. I was starting to do investigations with these phosphors that I had originally found in New Zealand. My friend Frank Roberts turned me on to these mineral shows, rock shows. And he said, there's a lot of illuminating phosphors there you can find. Take your black light and go to one of these shows. You can buy that stuff. So I started going to the shows, and I started pulverizing these rocks. I even took a shotgun and shot my television so I could scrape the powders out of the back of this stuff. I shot this damn thing right in my bedroom. It blew a hole into the center block.
Wow.
Of the television. But the thing was is that I was looking for this phosphor, and I was pretty impulsive in those days, so I thought it was all pretty funny. So the phosphors in the back of a television are remarkably uninteresting. But I learned that. And anyway, these phosphors that I found at the mineral shows were really interesting. And one in particular called franklinite. And franklinite's from Franklin, New Jersey, and it has willemite and calcite in it. These really bright, pronounced orange and green colors. So I started taking these rocks, and I started breaking them up. And I'd literally put the rocks in tubes and process the tubes. And they would work. In fact, I met a woman, a very famous lighting designer named Jan Moyer. She wrote the book on it, on landscape lighting. I met her at this Illuminating Engineers competition where I won this International Design Award. And we became fast friends. And I gave her the first piece I ever made with this rock pulverized in it. It was a mask, and it had the mouth had some of these like pieces of franklinite in it, and it glowed. And I started pulverizing it more and more, and then I started taking tubes, just regular industrial tubes that have all these different colors in them. I started pulling the color out of the tubes. I'd use a shotgun cleaner. It was a big wad of cotton, and I'd put a string on it and just pull it through the tubes. And I'd have this, this little bank of colors to work with. And I started putting these phosphors in a glass and processing them. And one thing led to another, and I ended up in New York City, and I went to meet Rudy Stern, because after that book that I found in 1982 in the Victoria Library, I found his Let There Be Neon. 10 years later, I was in his new book. And so I went to New York to meet him, and we became friends, and he became a mentor, and he introduced me to a guy named Ivan Karp, who owned the O.K. Harris Gallery. Ivan Karp's responsible for the why we know of people like Robert Rauschenberg and Andy Warhol. He was huge, and this gallery was renowned, and he introduced me to Ivan Karp because he thought that we would have a relationship. And we would have, but I lived in Washington, D.C., and Ivan Karp wanted me to move to New York, and that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. And I played that decision out and solved it in a painting called Why I Decided Not to Move to New York City. So this was my second rejection of New York, but I learned a lot there from Rudy, and he was a great mentor, and we ended up being very good friends. And, anyway, I went back to Austin, and I got more steeped in this phosphor work, and one thing led to another, and I ended up applying for a fellowship by a suggestion of a friend of mine who was the director of the Performing Arts Center at the University of Texas. She suggested I apply for this fellowship grant at the National Endowment for the Arts. So I did, and absolutely uncanny and remarkably, I received a fellowship for this phosphor work I'd been doing. I don't know if anybody has ever gotten a fellowship the first time out. I mean, people reapply for years and maybe get it, but the first time out of the bag, I think I was probably the last white guy in America to ever get a fellowship from the NEA. It's just like, it was an absolute miracle. So in a way, it kind of paid me back for the years of research I'd been doing already, but it also gave me money to go into deeper research, and it also gave me a great playing card, which was I was kind of laureate for a day. So I could go to places like Stanford and look up physics professors like Glenn Wycoomis, who would explain to me how lightning bugs work, and turned me on to the Fluorescent Mineral Society and all these different amazing samples of these phosphorescent minerals. So from there, I started buying samples from all over the place, all over the world, and I started grinding them up. And somebody published something about this fellowship of mine, and suddenly all of these different things started coming in the mail, like, hey, you want to try our phosphors? We've been working on this, and Sylvania had some nice ones, but the best phosphors of all came from Technolux, which goes right back to masonite and all these beautiful colors from Europe. So I would buy these phosphors in bulk from them. I don't know if you can get them anymore.
Yeah, you probably can't.
I also, I'm not sure. Two guys started Technolux distribution in America, and they had been to Alfred University in Fred Sheeta's class, and so they were really cool, and they would send me stuff. They were really excited about what I was doing, and I was buying a lot of glass from them, so they were fine with sending me bulk phosphors. That was a huge boon. Plus, I would go to old shops in the South and talk to real old-timers who had literally coated their own tubes during the Depression. I even bought an old tube coating machine that was this crazy thing, this 500-pound cast iron coating machine. It was really weird. It never worked, but it was just novel to have it. Anyway, this body of work from the NEA, I spent a year really investigating these things, and it ended up in one tube. I sent as my final report to the NEA in Washington, D.C. They wanted a written final report, and I wrote them back. I go, why would you ask a bunch of artists to write a final report? That's like having a writing grant, asking everybody, all the writers, to draw you a picture of what they had experienced. So I made one tube. And I said, this is my final report. And in what is contained in this tube is everything that I learned in this 1 year. And you can see the tube on my website. It's kind of everywhere. And so this tube is something that I made, and a facsimile of that is really a signature of most of my work now that I call nightsticks or spirit antennas, depending on how I use them. If they're just pure aesthetic, I call them nightsticks. And if I use them for the spirit houses and more sort of spiritual implementation, I call them spirit antennas. So the nightsticks are they're these glasses that these tubes that I use for pure aesthetic, and they are different pieces of welded bits of glass tessellated together to make just this beautiful composition within one tube. My idea was that instead of Las Vegas, where the whole environment is the atmosphere, I put all of that nightscape into a single tube where you can become intimate with what you see inside the tube. This was my goal. And so so for that, I was able to kind of accomplish this. And if you look on my website, you'll kind of see these things. But really, for me, through all of the miles of places I've been and things that I've seen and philosophy of work, is like, this neon that I make, it's really this great metaphor for the force and fragility of life and nature. And really, that's where I'm headed as far as the story I'm trying to tell in this work that I do. But the phosphorescents are very interesting, and I believe there's a question that was asked about the safety. My health was compromised about 20 years ago, and I didn't know why. And I blamed it on the hazardous materials that I was using in the neon shop, from mercury to these phosphorescent minerals. And I wrote off to the MSDS, and I got all these materials analyzed, and it's possible they are harmful. I never really found out for sure. A lot of the coated materials, the slurries that they use are ceramic, and that's what gets them to stick to the walls of the tubes. The phosphorescent constituents in those tubes are largely zinc. There are also a lot of rare earth elements and chemicals that, all I can say is they haven't killed me yet. It's possible from listening to a podcast called Shit Town that the mercury may have had an effect on my brain, because I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, but my memory is certainly slipping. But I found out that through diagnosis that it is not the materials that have caused health problems with me, which was muscle loss. And I talked with Brian Coleman about this and David Simpson years ago to see if they were having these problems. These are two giants in the neon art world, old friends of mine. Mm-hmm. Brian Coleman had some trouble, some physical trouble, and it sounded familiar. But what I found out for myself is I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. This is a genetic glitch in my chromosomes. It has nothing to do with any kind of hazardous materials at all. Whether it triggered something or not, no one has any research to know yet. Mm-hmm. But I'm here to say I'm alive and kicking and making work on all cylinders, even though about half of them aren't working anymore. So my advice to young people is learn whatever you're going to learn the best you can, because when you get old, you're basically doing it with one eye and one hand tied behind your back. So you better be good at it.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. It was one of the questions about, because a gentleman named Aaron Ristow was asking about that specific question.
Oh, Aaron, yes. We're Facebook friends. And
he
does great work. Hi, Aaron.
And he was just concerned maybe it was something with the phosphorus or whatnot, but it's a good thing that you had kept a practice that didn't make your studio a hazard to your health.
No, it freaked me out, though. And, I got mercury recovery kits. I really went all out, and nothing helped. And so that was curious to me. And so I ended up at a neurologist's office and with a real diagnosis. And I have to be satisfied with that, though I'm not satisfied. I refuse to let it define me. And so off we go.
It gives you something to work from, It gives you something to work with. Sometimes if it's too unknown, it just destroys you. So having something to work with allows you to build a foundation for lasting health,
You're a wise man, Percy.
I had a few run-ins myself, and my father passed away recently, but struggled through his thing. So it's something that I have a little bit of experience with, and we do our progenitors proud and keeping ourselves together anyways.
Well, I think that's a great discussion about legacy, and we could have a whole podcast about that. It's like, what is legacy for, really? I can sit here and review about my whole life story because it's basically, I could see it two ways. One is masturbatory, and the other is hopefully there's somebody out there that can learn something from it. A time comes, at least it did in my life and a lot of my mentor and role models' life, where, self-ingratiating artwork and that experience gives way to wanting to give something back. And that's really what I'm excited about is that. And I think that's the biology in us, is that, progeny comes in a lot of different ways. It can be in passing. There's a lot of ways to pass on something. It can be biological or intellectual or, through training an apprentice. And I want to put it out there. I've spent probably the last 20 years hoping that an apprentice would come along, because I don't want to die with this. I would love to pass it on. And I'm going to use this as a venue to put that out there. I'm looking for a curious person who's got nothing to lose.
It would be interesting.
And has great manners and shop sense.
It would actually be pretty interesting. You say when you're teaching, in your own practice, you mostly use the ribbon burner, right?
If I were making signs, which I haven't done since 1989, thank God, I would use mostly the ribbon burner for double backs and 90s. But if you look at my work, there's a spiral in the, look at the NEA tube. There's a spiral in that, and I have to use a ribbon fire for that. And that's a 16-inch length. It's a full length of my ribbon fire.
Right.
And you turn a full 24-inch piece of tubing like a rotisserie on that ribbon fire. And once it slumps, you don't turn it anymore, but you roll it back and forth, and you heat up the spine of this sort of convex piece of tubing over the ribbon fire. And then once it's orange on its spine, you take it out and you turn it vertically and you twist it like a dish rag, and you end up with this gorgeous spiral in the glass. That took me about 10 years and 30 minutes to figure out how to do.
How'd that develop?
It's really, yes, sir?
Sorry, you can continue. I was going to ask how that method developed. Like, how did it originate?
A guy named Gary Kemple, who was a man without a shop years ago, a terrific glass bender here in Austin, came in, and he had nowhere to work, and I had a big old shop, and I offered it to him. I said, you come on in here and make yourself at home. And he taught me that, and I had been trying to figure out how to do it for years, and in about 30 minutes, he showed me how to do it. Actually, in about 2 minutes, he showed me how to do it. And it's something that I love to pass on to people, because it looks so hard to do, and it's so fun and easy to do that I literally have taught 7-year-olds how to do it. And because the National Endowment for the Arts gave me a grant, I feel entitled to show all taxpayers and their children how to do this, because thank you for paying for this grant, you taxpayers. So it's really fun to do, but back to the ribbon fire and the crossfires. Yes, I have to do that in the ribbon fire, but all of my other work, for the most part, is done in a crossfire because it's fine work. And I used to use 2 cannon fires, which was a double barrel kind of crossfire. Mm-hmm. But I don't know why I switched over, but I use a regular 10-point crossfire now.
Okay.
Maybe it's more accurate. I'm not sure. I think it's really just whatever you get used to. I may have sold the double barrel thing and I just didn't have it anymore. But I can get this point really hot. So I use that for welding, and I most of my work really consists of welding tiny pieces of glass together. And that idea, these nightsticks, the idea came from, if you ever go into a neon shop, generally in the showroom, they'll have 2 tubes. They'll have one tube that has a display of all of the colors that you can use with neon, and they're all these different colors welded together in one tube. And then they'll have another display tube of all the neon colors that come with argon with mercury in them. Mm-hmm. So you'll have this like hot tube with pinks and oranges and reds, and then you'll have a cold tube, I call it that, with greens and turquoise and whites and purple and things like that. So I always thought those were really cool. So I thought, well, and I always thought that, like admirals in the Navy, they call it fruit salad, their badges or their medals. They call it fruit salads, all these different colors, these bands that they wear on their chest, in the military.
Yeah,
generally
I follow
in the Navy, I think. I thought those were beautiful. I thought, oh, man, what if I could just weld all these little different colors together? So that's really where that came from. And, that was in 1991. And so, the stuff that you see now, it probably looks really dated, but you have to know that these were experiments that started out of nowhere, how long ago was 1990? Jesus. So they've evolved to what you see now in my work. And I kind of got as far as I could with that work. And now, because it's a language for me, now I tell stories with this work. And the most current stories that I'm telling are what I call the spirit houses that I'm creating. And you can read about that online, but I won't bore you with the stories. But they come from spirit houses that I discovered in Southeast Asia. And so I make these spirit houses with neon in order to revitalize the materials that come from collapsed buildings that have a history of community inside that are basically going to the landfill. So when I say revitalizing these materials, I build these boxes, these like shadow boxes, these cradles made from these materials that have housed, many generations of life stories. And I revitalized them with these, what I call spirit antennas, which is a nightstick used for this purpose. And it basically brings back to life all of this, these connections and these relationships of all these people and materials. And so what a spirit house does in Southeast Asia that I'm trying to do and express is reverence to the spirit of nature and the spirit of our ancestors. So that gets back to what you were talking about, Percy. It's like, passing this thing on, and a stewardship to the shoulders that we all stand on.
Nice.
The end.
I mean, you've come a long way in years, and I really appreciate how you continue to show freedom in your work. A lot of times people get stuck, and they feel entangled or caged up a bit. But it's nice to still see that you're still just pushing and moving and letting things come from you.
Well, thank you. That's not my fault. That comes from back when I went and rounded up Stephen Antonakis in Dallas, Texas, when I just stuck to his side like glue while he was doing this giant installation for the Southwestern Bell Company there. At the end of the thing, I was so conflicted and so comparing myself and wondering how to, how I could ever aspire in a world where artists had already created everything. I was frustrated and I was lost, and I mentioned this to Stephen, and he just had this one thing to say to me. He just said, Ben, just do your work. Well, that's a life's work. I mean, I had no idea the width and breadth of a statement like that. It's taken my entire life to sort of process that one sentence he told me, that one statement. But, the problem is I think the biggest trap is comparison. And it can be so conflicting. I'm a songwriter, or I have been a songwriter, and that was a huge 5-year diversion from BeNEON. And in that world, I really realized about the world of comparison. It's all to them. It's all about making it or not. And the great thing about the art world is a world of ideas and sharing of ideas. But really, what it all boils down to is this place that, if you're lucky, you can find, or not. Everyone can do this. It's a way to find a process in yourself to where you can basically scratch your subconscious and just stand back and take notes to whatever bubbles up. That is the individual. That is ourselves. That is what we have to give, because you're tapping into this universal consciousness, I believe, and the way that you describe it through your own experiences and your own memories that you've constructed through your life. That is an absolute individual expression, and that's the beauty of the human experience, is if you can tap into that. And you always know it because you're in this like trance of creating something. If you're busy copying something, you never get in that trance. You're just a technician that's making something, and that's a beautiful thing. But there's a trance that comes with transformation of yourself into a manifestation of a tangible object. And if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. If you want to go there, the only way to find it is to find yourself. And there's only one way to go about that, and that's to spend time inquiring on the inside of who you are and getting quiet in there and building that light from the inside out.
But
well, thank you.
I do have a question. I'm not sure if you had answered this completely on that. Was your use of, like, how do you apply your phosphors to your tubes? Oh,
you're gonna love this, because I am so not academic, and I am such not a technician. I thought I needed to be a scientist for the NEA, and I thought I had to keep all these copious records, and And I finally, one day, I just wadded the whole thing up and threw it in the garbage and wrote him a letter and said, look, it's just going to have to happen like I do it. And the way that I introduce these phosphors, I take a 7-inch deck screw and I stick it in the friggin' phosphor and I dump it in the tube, and the surface tension of the tube holds what it wants to, and I may give it a tap or two, and that is as scientific as it gets.
Huh.
Yeah, it is. The surface tension does all the work, and so there's a step to the colors that go in, and the way that you have, and the organization of the colors one by one, that I'm not going to tell you about, because you're going to have to find it on your own. But I got to leave something here to discover and something fun for you. So you have to figure out which colors go in at the right time in order to make this exquisite iridescent kind of opalescent color. But that was the essence of the work, was trying to figure out this new color palette. And when I came on, when I just accidentally processed the tube that had this opalescent color that it emitted, I was just really astonished. And that was like, oh my God, it was like I discovered the North Pole. I felt like I had arrived. All right, if you beg me, I'll tell you. But you got to beg me. All right, I'm just making a big joke out of that.
Oh.
But okay, it's this simple, ladies and gentlemen. If you want that opalescent color, the first color you introduce is green. The second color you introduce is red. The third color you introduce is violet. And then the fourth is blue.
Okay, that actually makes sense.
It does?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot, I didn't have to tell anybody. Well, I tell you what, if you put in red first, if you rearrange the order, I you know what? I urge anyone to rearrange the order and find out what happens for themselves. You may find a place that you love more than I did this one, but this is where I arrived, and I just love it.
Like it makes perfect sense because of just the way it lights up. You know, the green is really just a yellow, even though it is green. It's hotter, so it's going to kind of run down. And the confusing part with violet and blue is that blue is a darker and denser, kind of less vibrant than the violet, because the violet's closer to red. So so that makes sense why you would layer it such a way to get your iridescence that you like, and that seems really vibrant and really dimensional.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, Percy? Because you're teaching me this, and now I'll be able to tell other people.
So it's kind of like
I never.
This is just a theory, but it's based on combining like color theory and the light spectrum. So if we're thinking about like, okay, with digital TV, you're looking at the RGB, which is red, green, and blue, right? And then if you think about in terms of painterly or even graphic design, or even layering of colors, you're going to use your blacks and blues as the background, your highest colors like a yellow, and so you got the yellow, red, blue, and black to get depth. So like if you gave me the four colors, green, red, violet, and blue, and I'm looking at this picture that you have of an example of one of your spirit sticks, I would have placed green first, red, and then I would have actually had trouble placing the violet and the blue. But if I'm looking at how the green represents a yellow, the red is the red, which is not as bright as yellow, and then trying to choose between the violet and blue, even though in some cases violet is different from being purple. If it was purple, I would have said purple goes last. But since it's violet, and violet is closer to red, it will be on the third place, and blue would be the last place.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. And there's something that people may or may not know, and that is that the argon beam, I don't use mercury, I use argon. It probably has some neon in it. But the argon emits a UV light, and that is what illuminates these phosphors inside.
And is that at
it's just
a lower pressure than typical?
Oh, no, just the argon when electrified, the light that it emits has UV.
Okay.
And so that UV, I don't think it's a pressure-related thing, Percy. I think it's just that is, and maybe neon does too. I just find this more beautiful. I mean, the neon will light up this phosphorus in its own colors as well, you know, to make orange or pink or red. But this just seems like the UV, that's this violet beam of argon, is emitting. You know, it's almost non-existent. It's just this. Well, it's not. It's very clear actually. Mm-hmm. And with the Tech 22 transformers that I use, it'll do this bubbling thing, which is everybody loves, that I have no control over. But
yeah.
The emission is UV, and that is what makes this phosphorescent mineral phosphoresce. Kind of like holding a black light up to a poster. I mean, it's doing the same thing, only it's doing inside of this tube. Mm-hmm. The difference is that a black light for a poster is long wave UV, and this is short wave. Mm-hmm. That's like a mineral lamp.
And of course, your use of your phosphor is more reactive to the UV that's presented through the argon. I played around with some stuff from Neon Products in the Netherlands, and you have to, well, especially if I'm messing around with plasma, it's a little bit different in terms of how much UV can be picked up from. But I did notice that argon did provide enough UV to light up some of the blues, the purples, and not so much of the red. But having a good red is something that even Mundy himself has been looking for.
Well, I got it. And you can find it in the tubes. If you can't get it from Technolux anymore, you can scrape it out of the German, the bromo purple that Technolux uses herself. Mm-hmm. Which is the very first stuff I ever saw. Funny, it's kind of all roads lead back to Rome. The other thing about actually a shortwave ultraviolet light has plenty of power outside of a neon tube and the argon inside of there. In fact, if you have these big vessels like Mundy, I'm always interested how little light he can compete, or how much light he can compete with those tubes, because the farther the beam is away from the wall of the glass where the phosphor is, the dimmer it gets. Mm-hmm. So that proximity, I think, is a big thing to note. I know if I'm using a 10 millimeter tube, the phosphors just explode. If I'm using a 15 millimeter tube, did I say 10 millimeter tube? Yeah. If I use the smaller the tube, the sort of more pronounced the colors will be, because it's closer to the beam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he kind of just has to balance it out with his arc pattern.
Yeah, I always want. Oh, that's right. So he has plasma, so it's kind of roaming around inside the tube, going to the walls, right? Especially if you touch it and it goes like right to your finger or whatever.
Right.
The capacitance. So I guess you get a big spike in color once the beam comes over to the wall of the glass, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in some ways you can create in some ways you can kind of create some kind of environment that brings some of the glow to the outside layer, like, and this is like what I've been trying to talk with Mundy about, is like, but he hasn't done a lot of crazy stuff with his phosphor coatings as of yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe he'll hear this and it'll give him some insight. But I would say Mundy Hepburn probably knows more than anybody in the entire field. You want to know the one thing that he knew that really has really helped? The one thing he has helped me the most with my work. Years ago, I called him and I said, "Hey, Mundy, how in the hell do you pack up all this stuff you make? I mean, he's amazing. I mean, just think of the logistics of getting that jellyfish from point A to point B, right? Just imagine that." So he kind of, it's like he taught me how to pack stuff. But the most interesting aspect of packing that he gave me is he said nothing ever makes it from one point to another unless you wad up at least one piece of the New York Times and pack it in there as part of your material. So to this day, anytime I'm shipping something, I have to go buy a damn New York Times and wad up a piece of that paper and put it in my box or crate or whatever to insure. It's like, yeah, okay, I'll buy insurance, but the real insurance, thanks to Mundy, is a piece of that New York Times in the box.
It's magic, man. It's a talisman.
It's magic.
That's
He's
what it
an
is.
alchemist.
Well,
So yeah, God, I hadn't talked with him in years.
oh man,
It was nice to hear him. He sounded good.
yeah, you should definitely give him a ring sometime.
God, I don't even have his number anymore. But yeah, you know, we were all in back in the '90s. We were all in shows together. We were it was like going back to high school reunions. He wouldn't be there very often, but his work always was. And people like Michael Fleckner. You ought to talk to Michael. Have you had a podcast with him?
Not yet. I've been in contact with him through the Facebook, but I haven't
Oh, dude.
gotten a call from him yet. He's all over the place. He never stops moving.
He never stops moving, and he's a really interesting person, and fun to talk with. And the last thing I heard, he was going with my old boss, Al Nodell from the Washington Project for the Arts. They've connected, and Al is Cuban, and he's bought into a neon shop in Havana, and they're restoring all the old nationalist signs in Havana. Al had previously done 250 signs, historic signs in Los Angeles, and now he's doing this in Havana and giving these cultural tours. And he and Michael are doing a show down there, and as I understand, I'll be doing a show with Al in 2020. Down in Havana. It's going to be really terrific. And Havana was the last time I ever saw my dad, was in Havana. And so there's a lot of spirits there for me to do spirit houses with there. And so anyway, it's really cool. I don't know if anybody's interested, but Al does these cultural neon tours to Havana. I'd go on Facebook and look for Al Nodell.
Al Nodell.
Nodal. I think he may call himself Alfonso. I can't remember, but he's a really interesting guy. He was the director of the Washington Project for the Arts. He was the director for the New Orleans Contemporary, and then he signed on with the city of Los Angeles to restore all of these signs there. Really interesting guy. He'd be great to have on. He doesn't know. He's the guy that was doing neon before anyone was, and he's the guy that got Stephen Antonakis to do the neon fronts on the WPA. I wouldn't know what neon was without Alfonso V. Nodal. Yeah, if you think that it would be interesting for the glass school up there, for somebody like me to show up and and if I have something to offer, I would be thrilled to come.
The outro is The Process by Lakey Inspired. Jordan, aka Lakey, is a Los Angeles-based artist with the goal of inspiring others to create by sharing positive music around the world. Thus, he works hard to produce music every week for copyright-free use. So be sure to support his music by giving credit when used, subscribing, and or by donation via Patreon. You can find him on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Thank you for listening to the Taming Lightning podcast. I'd like to thank Ben Livingston for having this conversation with me. I definitely enjoyed his story and appreciate his willingness to share his opalescent phosphor technique. If you have an opportunity and the resources, spend some time to explore what's been presented in this episode. We'd love to see what you discover. Also, I'd like to thank the Pittsburgh Glass Center for supporting me as a place of research and inspiration, as well as encouraging me to pursue this project, and the Plasma Art Alliance, where I have an access to a well of knowledge and connects me to some amazing people. If you'd like to support Taming Lightning, you can subscribe to our newsletter on www.taminglightning.net and follow us on Instagram at Taming Lightning. Other options for support are donations through Buy Me a Coffee, where you can donate for the price of a $3 cup of coffee with links provided in the show notes. Feel free to share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.